Our scripture lesson our scripture lesson this morning comes from Paul's second letter to the Corinth church, 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 1 through 7. It's in your worship folder, it'll also be on the screen behind me if you would join me in reading the scripture this morning. And now, brothers and sisters, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. In the midst of a very severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. For I testify that they gave as much as they were able, and even beyond their ability, entirely on their own. They urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the Lord's people. Then they exceeded our expectations. They gave themselves first of all to the Lord, and then by the will of God also to us. So we urged Titus, just as he had earlier made a beginning, to bring also to completion this act of grace on your part. But since you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in complete earnestness, and in the love we have kindled in you, see that you also excel in this grace of giving. Will you bow with me for a moment of prayer? Gracious God, we thank you. We thank you for your love. We thank you for your words. We thank you for the way you continue to meet us where we are. And Lord, each of us is in a different spot. Each of us is in a different place, but you continue to be there. And you continue to extend to us your love and your grace, and you continue to fill us with who you are. And so, Lord, as these words reach our hearts and reach our minds, we ask that your Spirit begin to work them into our life, that we may see you, that we may worship you, that we may deepen our relationship with you. We ask this in your name. Amen. Amen. Today is the end of the church year, the church calendar year. It's a new beginning. It's called Christ the King Sunday. Next week we start Advent. Next week we start getting ready for Christmas. But as we talk about Christ the King Sunday, I think it's a very appropriate way of thinking about that day, because it's a day where we say that Christ is King, that Christ is Lord. And in doing so, we're talking about stewardship. We're talking about our whole life. For those who are just visiting us, we've been talking about stewardship for the last couple of weeks. We talked about giving our entire life, all that we are. Our time and our talent is what we've talked about the last couple of weeks. And today we're talking a little bit more about our treasure. And not our treasure that maybe you think of. You may be thinking, oh, here comes that money thing. That's not exactly what I'm talking about. Because each of us have something different that we hold as a treasure. Each of us has something different that we put in our hearts, that we hold on to and we prize highly above other things. Some of it is finances. Some of it may be family. Some of it may be friends and relationships. Some of it may be the clothes that we have. Some of it may be the houses that we own. Some of it may be more than just the material things. Maybe it's emotional or something great, deeper within us. But there's something that we treasure. And Jesus continues to talk about those things that we treasure. He talks about treasures more than anything else, because he wanted people to understand that where their treasure is where their heart is. And as they understood that, he wanted them to also understand that treasure then belongs with God and should be placed with God and should be God. And so he worked all this out, and through his ministry, he continued to share these ideas that God is our treasure. That he says in Matthew that don't put our heart or don't put our treasure where moths and rust and thieves can break in and steal, but to put our treasure with God and in the kingdom that God has and the thing that God is doing. And so as we think about that idea of treasure, we think about what it is that we prize and what we hold on to and put dearly and put our heart into. See, as Paul's writing this letter to his second letter to the Corinth church, the first letter, he pretty much yells at them for not putting God first. That they put so many other things in God's place and in God's where God was at. That he just let them have it. The second letter is a little bit more nicer, but he still wants them to understand that as God is, as Jesus is King, that he has it all. And we come to this, almost the end of this second letter, and Paul's reminding this church in Corinth that they made a promise to help those in need. And so in helping them to understand that they made this promise, he shares with them about another church, a poorer church. A church that didn't have anything, a church that hardly had enough resources to gather together, a church that barely had enough resources to be able to make their own ends meet, let alone the church ends meet. And he says, I want to lift up to you this church in Macedonia. I want to lift up to you this church that has pleaded with us the privilege of giving. And he described this church, a church that put God first, a church that said, you know what, God is, we're giving this to God in the first place because it's not ours, it's God's. And his love for us has continued to be poured out upon us. And we want to see that love and we want to share that love. And so here, God, here's what we have. Here's all of us. Our whole being, our hearts, our minds, our love, our mercies, our grace, our possessions, our materials. It's yours. And as they had put God first, they heard about a need. And they heard from Titus, make sure I get the right person, from Titus that this need was being known, that Jerusalem was under siege. And the people there were hurting and were dying. And this Macedonian church, this church that knew about God's grace and was going through their own trials, gave. And Paul sets it up first. He says they first gave to God, and then by God's will, they gave it to us. And I think that is what I kind of wanted to focus on, is this opportunity, this privilege of sharing. This privilege of giving. Too many times we think that it has to be done, that it's been crammed into our hearts and our minds, and maybe too many people have been up here like I am and just say, you have to do this. And then I think about this Macedonian church and Paul's words, that they pleaded urgently. Another scripture says that they begged. And Paul, who's been to many churches, says, you know what? You don't have to. You don't need to. This isn't part of what you need to do. But they begged him for this privilege of giving. They begged him. They were on their, the words in my mind as they were on their hands and knees pulling at Paul's cloak and saying, let us give. Give us this opportunity, this privilege. So many other things are taken away, but this is one of those things that we can do. Let us do it. Let us share, let us give, let us open up our hearts. We trust God, we love God, we know that it's all God's in the first place. Let us share that. Give us that opportunity. This past week, that really hit home with me. We we help individuals with different variety of needs. And over the past month, we helped an individual get to a medical appointment. We put gas in his vehicle. And this individual came back this week and returned the money. He came to us because he had no money to put gas in his vehicle to go. And he came back and says, I have some extra. Here it is. Pass it on. Give to somebody else. It struck me because this man's situation isn't one that is filled with abundance. And I kept thinking about this Macedonian church and thinking about this privilege of giving. He was doing the same thing. It wasn't that he begged us to. He said, here, I want you to have this. I want you to use this. I want this to go for someone else. We could have said, no, you need it more than we do. Could have been in that place where Paul is. But then it dawns on me, this opportunity, this privilege of giving, that we all have it, that we all want to do it, and we all should be doing it. We should all be sharing out of the love and the love that God has given to us, that overflowing love that is deep and wells up within. It's not something that we have to. Later on, Paul will talk about that whoever sows generously reaps generously. This is later on in 2 Corinthians 8. But he's setting it up because it's this first part of this privilege of giving. And I learned a long time ago this privilege of giving. I've thought about it over and over again. There was an earlier point in time in my ministry where I didn't want to receive. We'd go out to lunch, and I would always make sure I was the one that was taking care of the bill because I knew the people that I was eating lunch with. I knew that they weren't able to handle this and afford this and care for this. And then the person that I was having lunch with said, you need to stop. This is the way I want to give, and I want to help, and I want to serve. I want to give this to you. I want this opportunity to share my love for you. And it started to dawn on me that giving is that overflow of love. Giving goes beyond than just meeting a need. Giving is meeting that need because of my love for that person, my love for God, my love for people. And when I say my love, it's not just the love that I have within me, because let's all face it, our love can be selfish, right? Usually it's for a self-serving opportunity that we do this. But when I talk about my love, I mean God's love poured into me that comes out. Going back to that idea of Wesley and that Wesley's grace and that grace of God of seeing other people through God's eyes. That should be our love. That should be my love. And that's where this opportunity and this privilege of giving comes from. Not out of the abundance that's, I don't even have my wallet on me, abundance that's in my wallet, but the abundance that's in my heart. That Macedonian church didn't have abundance in their wallet, but they had an abundance in their heart, and they gave accordingly. So as we wrap up this idea and this topic of stewardship, we come to that point in time where we need to ask ourselves the question, who is king? Who is it that is the one who is I entrust everything with? Is it me? Or is it God? And as we settle that question, then comes the other question of why do I do this? Why am I being as managing the resources, the stewardship, managing the resources God has given to me? Am I managing it for me? Or am I managing it out of my love for God? That's what it means to be a steward. That's what it means to have this privilege of giving, not just our financial resources, but our time and our talent and our life. So what will you do with yours? How will you manage your life?